Well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're in. Thanks for attending our webinar. This is number 5, Troy, of our series
Yep.
this time around.
Yeah.
My name is Rick Sterling, and I'm the president of Western IM. Just wanted to thank everybody for attending on behalf of Western IM. And I'll introduce Troy Sawyer to you. Troy is one of my partners at Western IM. He is the lead developer. That's the role he serves here at Western IM, and also it happens to be the architect of the Whisper tool. So he knows the product deeply. Let's say deeply. I, for one, am always really excited to have Troy do these webinars, and I learn all kinds of things while he's doing the webinars as well. So I'll look forward to having Troy do this today, and we'll be back to discuss some of it after the Troy's finished. So thanks again, everybody, and I'll go away now. Give you to Troy.
Thanks, Rick. Welcome. So yeah, this is the final part of the 5-part series for our next project that we've labeled our next project. I'm not sharing my screen yet. I'll bring it up here in a sec. I just wanted to kind of take a quick second to recap kind of what we've seen before for anybody that maybe have missed one of the ones in the past, and kind of what to expect from this one, being part 5, the final conclusion. So just to summarize, we looked at a number of different sources when we're trying to kind of take an inventory, whether it was electronic or physical information. We looked at connecting to some databases. We got some department information, personnel information from databases. We got dumped from Access or Iron Mountain, where we brought in our boxes. We got our volumes from a SharePoint site. We looked at some share drives and SharePoint, and indexed and brought in some files and reorganized them along with some email. So the purpose of today is basically, let's tie everything together that we've done so far, take a look at what it looks like and what we can do with it going forward, whether it's just straight export, maybe it's an archival process. We'll look at how we can manage data in a SharePoint site going forward, how we can use that classifications that we've identified in the past webinars to use. As well, how do we manage content in SharePoint? Maybe somebody's making changes in a SharePoint site. How do we get that back? And how can we have a two-way kind of integration with some of those sources, not just a straight, hey, we're done with Whisper, put it out there. Let's still do our records management stuff. Let's still do our reviews. Let's still do some metadata indexing and things like that. So let's take a look at what that kind of looks like. Let me open this up here. So you should be able to see my screen now. So this is kind of the main area that if you were in the past ones, you kind of remembered. Basically, the organizational structure that we worked out was basically a company and has departments, and then within the departments, we started putting our data, whether it was the physical information, the boxes, the files within those, the folders on the shared drive, the information on the SharePoint site. So just going to kind of click through a couple of this just to remind people where some of that information came from. Now, the first part we will look at, I'll focus on the electronic stuff. We're going to be actually taking emails and documents that we found from shared drive, SharePoint, and from our email, and actually getting those out to SharePoint. That'll be kind of the first place we'll focus on. I'll then elaborate on specific cases for emails and some of the ways we captured project numbers, and then we'll go to some physical stuff, and then I'll come back around and tie it up with one more example other than share. We're going to be looking at some Documentum and how we use some functionality in there along with Whisper. So here's my sources that we kind of brought in. This is the electronic sources. I won't bring up the data mapping. Definitely go back and take a look at how we connect to the databases to get some of the department information. But for this one, we're going to start looking at, so for example, here we had some SharePoint information. For example, I think this was under corporate finance. We put some of the SharePoint documents that were in a different part of our SharePoint site. I'm still going to be in the same SharePoint site. I'm going to export to a different library. But this is coming from one of those libraries on that SharePoint site. We're actually going to move it to the other one in our new structure. So this is more of a reorganization that happened. So on the SharePoint now, it existed in this folder, but we're going to put it in our new folder structure that's driven by the department. We had emails, for example. We had quite a few emails here where we found we flagged a couple of these emails with personal information. We captured, who sent it. Internet message ID, we actually captured some project numbers. We'll actually elaborate on the project numbers here when we get to that email. So essentially here, we're going to be using, I showed in previous ones, the electronic profile. so just like the electronic profile where we specified where we're looking at, which folder on the shared drive, which email, which folder in the email, our export profiles allow us to kind of specify that same kind of information, but the way out. So let's take a look at a couple of export profiles. Specifically, we're going to look at this SharePoint one. I won't come in here very much, but I just wanted to highlight here that essentially we're just telling Whisper, when you run this profile, export it to this site, give me the, you can select a library here from the dropdown. This is all of my document libraries on my site. So I'm actually going to use this sec folder is we're going to actually export to. And we'll come back to a couple of these other things, link to tab and link to type when we do the physical information with SharePoint lists. So let's just take a kind of look at what this looks like. We had SharePoint documents, we had shared drive documents all in this structure. And basically kind of when we hit that export to SharePoint, I've already run this, I ran this yesterday. We'll actually run a smaller set of data. This took about 3 minutes. I didn't want to do it in the webinar, but this is kind of what we get out the other end. In our sec document library, we have our folder structure being built. So I think under, what was it, human resources, we had a timeline. Actually, if I go back up, it was corporate finance. We had so these 3 documents actually came from another SharePoint site. Just like we saw here, if I click on where it was, I can see what source it was and where it came from. When I ran this export, just a little bit of technical information, Whisper never actually had that file. When we ran our export, we went to that SharePoint site, that shared drive, that email box, and took the information directly from there and passed it right out to the other side. So that passive nature of Whisper was definitely honored during our export process. But this is kind of the result we get. We got all these different sources coming together and come out the other side where we have our new organizational structure based on departments, and we actually spit out all those sources out to our destination here. In this case, the shared drive or the SharePoint site. So that's kind of the straight, hey, I have documents here. This is the view in the middle here. This is how I want to reorganize it. This is typical of a reorganization job. Put it out to my SharePoint site, all done, clear. But we did a lot more with the Whisper site or the Whisper repository in past webinars. Things like we gathered classification. Now that we've exported it out to SharePoint, we didn't actually do anything with the classifications. Because this information still lives in Whisper here on this document, I have a COM04 classification. That information is still here, so I can still run reports to say, hey, show me everything that is in my system. If I go to my classification tab here and I say, show me documents, we'll go files here. And I think that was a 7-year, so like 2030 here. Show me all the documents that have come up for met its projected date. So here you can see actually that file that I exported to the shared SharePoint site. I still have a report of it in Whisper to do things like the classification reporting. So this could tell me that this document's ready to go, and we can generate reports from here. So let's go back in. That was just the straight organization. I think during part 3 of the webinar series, we showed how we could automatically tie some of this content to the organizational structure based off of departments, but we also captured things like metadata. And I'm actually gonna just do a subset of documents here. I'm gonna focus just on the emails here. This subset of emails that was in one of my boxes, folders in my email, I just synced it in here. We've got a number of different emails. From here, we actually captured not just the organizational structure, but we also captured things like who sent it, the display to off the email. We captured some project numbers. We ran a specific rule to say, if you find a 5-digit number, assume that's a project number and put it into the project number. So here we can see that this metadata, all nice and available in Whisper. We didn't actually get it into SharePoint here. If we can see, I'm gonna go back up to the top level here, and I ran the export on this. I'll run it again here in a second just to show the power. When I made that metadata in Whisper, it found display to, for example, it found on the email a metadata field called display to and automatically put it in there. It also works on the export. You can see here I have a display to column, and it actually put the metadata that was in Whisper into that column automatically. We didn't have to do any special mapping. It literally was name to name attribute, and it found it in SharePoint as a column and put that metadata in there. And I want to just kind of demonstrate how that works. So here, I'm actually going to add another column here. Let's start working on that the idea of that project number. How can we organize those emails in our SharePoint site based on that project number? So I'm going to do project number. I'm just going to check here, make sure I name it the same. So this project number, I'm just going to name it the exact same in SharePoint here and save. So now I've got a project number column within Whisper. So the data is not there, but if I actually just quickly hop back into here and run my export again to, here, let me go over just those emails. We'll just export these emails, and I export these emails. Again, just to emphasize the nature of what's happening with this export, I'm connecting to my email here to get that email. It's not in Whisper. It's not coming from the server side in Whisper. It's going out to my email directly. So me logged into this computer, have the credentials put into Whisper for this client to connect to my email and bring it over to SharePoint. So it takes a second here the first time you connect here. So he's going through and updating those, grabbing those emails again, and then puts it back out to the SharePoint site. But here, if we just give it a second here, we'll see our project number. We only had 2 emails that had project numbers on them. We can see that now that metadata field automatically got populated. I didn't have to do any configuration. I didn't do anything special in Whisper. I had a metadata field in Whisper and a column in SharePoint, and it automatically populates. So let's actually finish this idea of how we can use that metadata field to help us organize the emails coming out to SharePoint. So I'm going to go through here in this email review tab we set up last part in part 4. And what we did is we created this tab to say, show me all the emails that weren't flagged for PII. So this is something where somebody can come in to do some more indexing for us. We automatically found a couple of project numbers, but all these emails I know are associated with an email or with a project. So I want somebody to come into this tab, give them permission to access this tab. All these emails are not flagged PII, and let's just do some indexing here. So I'm going to add a couple of project numbers here, 444. And I'm going to go down and maybe I'll make the rest of these here. I'll update the rest of these project numbers. And maybe we'll do 3333. So we're starting to get a full index of all of our project numbers here. I'm going to put another one into 54321. So here we can see we've got project numbers for all of our emails now. Just going to quickly run this again. To put this out here, again, it's connecting again to my emails to get the most recent version of that email, so that when I run this, I've got the most up-to-date, not just from the metadata I put in, but also the email from the server. And what will happen here is, well, okay, this takes a second to connect to my email, but what will happen here is we expect that all the project numbers for all those emails will be set. Now, this will be important because I'm just going to quickly do a change of view in SharePoint to group those emails based off of project number in SharePoint. So here, if we hop back over, just give it a second here, and all those project numbers are set. This email was actually not part of this set. So, you know, it found the emails that were there and updated them, left the ones that were already there alone. But here now, if I actually just do a simple group by project number in SharePoint, we can start to see how we can use that metadata we captured in Whisper to help us organize it just within SharePoint by changing a view by grouping. So here I can see I've got all of my projects, project 1234, 3333, 4444, 243221. All of those are actually just groupings within SharePoint. So now we've got all of our emails, we captured some project numbers from the metadata in the email. We've indexed a couple of other ones, and out the other side here by grouping within SharePoint, we can start to see how we can see all the emails associated with one particular project. Okay, so that's the electronic side. That's, you know, how do we get files from sources, reorganize them out the other side? How can we add metadata? How can we report on classification stuff still within Whisper? And then how can we use some of the features within the destination to help us view and group that information even more from the metadata that we captured? So I just want to hop back into Whisper, and I'm going to show one more case here. We're actually going to look at a SharePoint list. So this was all documents. And take a step back, if you remember, all the way to part 1 or 2 of this, we actually captured some of our source information from a SharePoint list. We used our data mapping tool and we connected to a SharePoint list, and that's where we got all of our volume information. So we had all these volumes that we actually captured did come from our SharePoint list to begin with. So I showed how our different sources gave us data and we put it out there, but how can we kind of do a two-way integration to maybe a SharePoint list here to get the data, but also put in a back and forth kind of manner. In this case, I'm going to show, I did a video recently, you might have seen it, I sent it around to a few people on how somebody can make a request for a piece of information, physical piece of information off of a SharePoint site and report on that in Whisper. So that's kind of what we're going to look at here. So I'm going to go and just bring up my SharePoint list here. I have my corporate documents. It's called new list here. And this is all of our physical information. So yesterday I kind of did an updated information and exported it out here. But if I go back into Whisper here, you can see that some of this information has been requested. And this is where I actually want to go back into my export profile to show this link to a tab or link to a type. So I'm going to go to my export. So basically what I'm saying here is whenever this export profile is run, I want it to run against this volumes tab. So you always want to run that information from this tab that I have here. Or anytime I make a change to a volume itself, publish that out to, in this case, this profile to the SharePoint list. So what does that mean? So I'm going to actually just change over here to my requests one. We brought all of this information. There was quite a few, there's 4 volumes here on the SharePoint site that somebody's requested. They've changed the metadata flag to request. I've captured who made the edit to it, and I can see that I've got 4 requests here. So maybe in this case here, if I expand this one, we actually tied one of the electronic off of our shared drive, actually found a file for the electronic version of this physical information. So this is somewhere where I can not necessarily have to pull the physical information and send it to the person. I can actually view the associated electronic file with this. Maybe I want to send that out. We've got a new feature here where you can actually directly email a document from Whisper. So it's actually gone out to the shared drive, got that, put it into an attachment and started generating an email for you. So maybe we fulfill this request. So I made this request here, so I'm going to send it to me as requested. I think I showed some of this before, but I'm just going to send this out. But what I want to do this time is now that I've fulfilled this request, I'm actually going to say this is no longer requested. Now this is where a little bit of the magic happens, just like I saw in my export where it found the column in SharePoint and updated it. When I just actually modify this one, because my export profile says anytime you change the volume, update it, and I hit save here, it's actually going to update that, not just in Whisper, but publish that out directly to my SharePoint list here. So this one says yes here. In a second, it should flip over to no. A few seconds ago, it was modified. So not only do we have the ability to do bulk lift and load, we also have the ability to map metadata and then also do kind of a management situation where we're managing the data in the SharePoint site directly from Whisper to allow us to do things like fulfilling requests from that SharePoint list. So now that this one has been fulfilled here, if I refresh this left-hand side, I only have 3 files left because this tab is my requested tab. So it's only showing volumes that the request for it is true. Just like we did on our email tab where it says only show me emails that are not PII. Good. So that's kind of how we can use Whisper to do specifically with SharePoint. I know this is something that's pretty generic to a lot of people. A lot of organizations have SharePoint implementations in some way or another, whether it's just team sites or it's their corporate repositories, things like that. This is how we can add value to those. But I wanted to take it one step further. I actually wanted to look at a Documentum system. We have quite a few clients here at Western IM that have Documentum, but not to focus on Documentum specifically, but just to show some of the other capabilities of what's possible. SharePoint's pretty straightforward. There isn't a lot of bells and whistles, things like retention policies. Yes, they're starting to put some labels, they call them labels in that in Whisper, but I wanted to show how we can use that functionality in another EDRMS system. In this one, we're going to actually look at Documentum. So I'm just going to refresh here to relog back in. So I did this same idea where I did that same dump. I had my organization structure based on company and departments, and I exported to a cabinet within here where I have my documents. Again, some of these documents came from SharePoint. Some of these documents came from our shared drive. Some of the emails came from my inbox. All that information got exported here. But one step further to this is that Documentum is very good at doing like retention. How do we then utilize the functionality in Documentum, not just for groupings and displaying and metadata, but actually the core functionality of retention? So what we did here is, if I hop back into Whisper, I'll go over to my electronic tab. If I take a look at one of these, we actually have that COM04 here that I mentioned earlier. Before we were reporting on it in Whisper, show me everything that I have a record of. We export it to SharePoint, tell me when that document's ready to go. But when we put it out to Documentum, we wanted to apply that retention policy directly to these files. Now, the issue here is that the file itself lives in the file plan. And if we do something like an inherited retention, where we put the retention on a folder, everything in it would get the same retention, but all these files might have different classifications. So we actually looked at the classification that we had in Whisper, and when we did the export here, we had an additional rule that said, find the classification RPS, Retention Policy Service controlled area of Documentum, and link it to that. So not only did we put it into the file plan, but if I actually view locations of this actually lives in two places. So it's in two folders within Documentum. With SharePoint, we can't really do that where we have the same file being referenced in two areas. So here it lives in the corporate organizational file plan, but then was also linked to the retention controlled area where it applied the COM04 policy. It's just one more kind of feature capability of Whisper is that a lot of times when we're going to these, it's not clear cut. There's other functionality. And I just wanted to demonstrate here how we can use another EDRMS and the functionality within that to, in this case, apply the classification. So at the end of the day, we have our SharePoint stuff. We've got all of our sources, whether it was from SharePoint itself, whether it was from a SharePoint list, shared drive, databases. A lot of the folder structure from our departments actually came from a database at the beginning, if you remember in part 1 and 2, and built that new structure, reorganized it out to a shared drive. Now, what I've shown here was an actual kind of just straight reorganization. The other area that this has come in handy is kind of an archival process where we have shared drives that, hey, we've got this huge unorganized shared drive, but there's pieces of it that can be moved to an archive, for example. So we want to export a subset of those documents. We run rules to say documents that are older than 10 years put into an archives folder, and we only brought that archives folder over to a archives area in EDRMS or SharePoint. So that's comes up quite often too. The interesting thing here is that what we did, all those sources still exist out there. So in that archival process, when we moved copy files off of the shared drive, users still get to use that shared drive. If I go to that shared drive right now here, for example, I'll go up to here. If I open this up, I can see that this still lives here. Users can still be filing here. I can run a sync to get the most recent information. We looked at how we can look at changes that happen to sources. But the passive nature of Whisper in that this still is out there, we can still use it, do all this work, and then do a jump at the end is one of the strong features I think I wanted to kind of emphasize in the Whisper product today. So that kind of wraps up what I wanted to look at. 25 minutes, that's about good enough, I think, for the amount of time you want to sit here and look at the screen clicking around. I think maybe we'll get Rick to come back on here, and I think we'll have a little bit of a discussion around some of the benefits and other use cases for this kind of scenario.
Hey, Troy, thanks.
Yep.
You know, I can't help but want to say to all of our professionals on the webinar today that the kinds of things that happened to us over the last 20 years, and we've done virtually every kind of information management project you can ever imagine in the last 20 years across the country and all over the place. And we've never had a tool like Whisper to be able to do that. We actually at Western IM here, Troy's group at Western IM and the professional services group, use Whisper for every project we do now. And I don't know what we did before. I I can think back and go how terribly difficult some of those projects might have been over time. But now with Whisper to actually do some of those things, it makes it so much easier and faster to get those projects done. The other thing I wanted to say is that I mean everybody's got a use case in mind for something, right? Troy, they have a use case when they start, like they might want to do a physical inventory, and maybe they think somewhere down the road they want to do something with electronic information or not, but they have a use case in mind or a project in mind they want to do. And Whisper kind of becomes that enabler to enable everybody to be successful in whatever kind of project they actually want to do. One of the worst things that's ever happened to me, and I'm talking personal experience now in projects over the years, all different kinds of projects that we've ever done across the country, is that the users tend to want to fight change hard. So, I mean, records and information management may want to reorganize electronic areas. They might want to do a lot of things, but in the end, if the user has to change that old comfortable pair of shoes that they have had for a long time and have to put things away in a different place, they fight tooth and nail sometimes to not want to do that. And the other part of that whole issue is the timing's never right. I mean, a lot of people want to have an EDRMS system eventually, like a document and records management system there's lots of them out there that you could use, but they want to have one, but the timing's never right. The budget wasn't there. They couldn't get approval. They couldn't get the funding. They couldn't get everybody to agree that that was the right thing. And in some cases, they've decided on one EDRMS system at one point, and a couple of years later, they've moved to something else. SharePoint's a classic example of this, where IT went out and did things with SharePoint, where the EDRMS people maybe we're working with a Documentum or an OpenText or whatever, and eventually somebody goes, well, wait a second, we're going to shift everything over to SharePoint, or we're going to shift everything over to OpenText or Documentum or Perceptive or whatever the application is over there. So the timing's never right on all of these things that people do. And so, Troy, that the fact is we can actually use our vision passively in Whisper to how we want to classify all the information electronically, and the users aren't being bothered at all, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, today we showed how we could export it at the other end. But as I had mentioned there, when we looked at the shared drive, that shared drive is still there. We, as people that are records people or information management professionals, or you've been tasked with, doing classification, can look at the content, say in this organizational structure that we built here. It could be any organizational structure you'd like, but that shared drive is still there, and users can be filing to it like they're normally used to, but we can still see it the way we need to see it to be able to do things.
And so we don't, our team, if we have a team of people working with us in our group, not all of the team will have access to those areas of the shared drive, right, Troy? I mean, they may not have access to HR or legal like the records manager would in an organization. So if I had several people working with me on the team, I wouldn't want to change that kind of security aspect of them being able to see all the documents that live in all those shared drives. And Whisper allows that, right? You don't automatically have access to the documents out in the system by having access to the metadata in Whisper to do the project you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. We really try to emphasize that with Whisper is that it is passive. When I'm looking at these sources, Whisper itself, the server doesn't get to see it. You are the one seeing. This is a live view from my permissions, from me logged into this computer, get access to that. And if I go to another computer and log into somebody different, and that login doesn't have permission to see that shared drive, we don't get to open the documents on it. If we've given them permissions to see metadata, like what I've done here with this tab, is I said, another user comes along, maybe you got a summer student to do some of the indexing. I give them a tab that has the metadata for the email in my inbox, but I've filtered out anything that was flagged PII. So that's even more granular in that not just the source, but then further to PII flags, for example, here, whoever has access to this tab only sees emails from my inbox that are not flagged PII. Yeah.
Yeah, so that works in use cases like you're working in HR, and there's something that has a discipline in the metadata. You certainly don't want anybody in the project to be able to see that kind of thing. You may want to filter that out and along the way. So we have option to do that and decide how that might look, Troy.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, those are the things that have really always impacted projects from my standpoint of why projects are very successful or not as successful in an organization. It's usually related to the users and how hard they want to fight to keep that old pair of shoes that's comfortable along the way. And even though a lot of times they say, yeah, I'm okay with that, what inside their head they're going, there's not a chance I'm gonna do this. And it becomes problematic, and they do find ways around it if they really want to do that. So some of the smaller clients, Troy, I've run across over a period of time, they're never going to have an EDRMS system because they don't have enough IT people or folks in the organization to actually deal with the infrastructure for something that complex. So Whisper could actually run a smaller organization, right? In terms of retention, disposition, all that kind of normal inventory, all those things that we ever get asked for in organizations to make sure the compliance is there across the board. Does that sound rational to you?
Yeah, it definitely is the case. We have quite a few clients that are actually in that exact case where, their corporate shared drive is the repository, and they have people, they have IT people, they have records people that have their jobs to do, that Whisper gives them the ability to do it on those existing systems. In a lot of cases, a shared drive. So we want to find everything that's ready to go on a shared drive. As an IT guy, you're like, hey, we don't want to keep stuff on here that's more than 10 years old. Whisper gives you the tool to say, okay, show me everything that is created older than 10 years, and let's run a report on that to start looking at what we can clean up. Yep.
Yeah, so theoretically, Whisper can take the part of the records management component of, let's say, a SharePoint site. I mean,
yeah.
And leaving the SharePoint site alone. And I see a lot of that these days, and a lot of the IT people would tell me the same thing, that they put SharePoint in a while ago, like they've had SharePoint for quite a while now. And so the SharePoint sites, some of the bigger ones, document control kind of SharePoint sites, have become like a shared drive again. So now they have shared drives, and they have SharePoint sites that are also shared drives in a lot of cases. And so we pretty much need to clean some of those up too, I'm guessing, along the way. Is that your experience, Troy?
Yeah. As we kind of continue to build on our export and electronic profiles, the idea that we can kind of connect to a site and see all the available lists and document libraries and things like that, to make sure that we're going through, maybe not with a fine-tooth comb, but making sure we're capturing each of those areas so that we can start doing some of those processes we've mentioned on everywhere. That
Yeah, because that's like we always say around Western IM, if you don't know what you've got, you can't manage it. So it's all about actually inventorying all of those sources that you have in the organization, physical and electronic, and making sure you can cast some kind of classification on that information, including drafts and everything else along the way.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think they're the first part of this webinar series where we were talking about, hey, we had boxes and files in those boxes, and we got that information. But then when I pulled that box, I actually still have it on my desk. We pulled that box over here. We realized we started getting binders, right? We didn't account for that kind of thing. So if you don't know what you got, you can't manage it, right? So.
Yeah, and the other thing about Whisper, Troy, that I want to make sure everybody relates to with some of the webinars, because we've covered an awful lot of ground in the last 2 series of webinars we've done, is that Whisper allows that kind of integration between paper and electronic information. So we actually can see all of that stuff together as a linked situation in Whisper. We can see the boxes, the folders, the electronic information, the manuals, the paper manuals, if they are, the this is for the records management people in the crowd, the rubber boots that were in the boxes, if that's what you need to see when you did the inventory, that kind of stuff. So all of that stuff can be linked together, so you can actually get a full vision of what's available. And I got to think that that's got to help a lot in those areas of freedom of information requests, right? You can actually see all of that stuff together and where that might live in the organization for anybody that's involved in that kind of freedom of information request, the FOIP, depending which province you're in, everybody has those same kinds of issues. And I know that all of you privacy people and people who have to deal with freedom of information management requests, I know all of you are the ones with the tiny beads of sweat on your forehead having to say, yeah, we got it all. We know where it all is and we got it all. So this is probably something that could really assist in that area.
Yeah, we saw that when we did some of the rules where we're trying to find PII information, where we had employee IDs that were easily identified within my email to say, okay, we know that this is going to be something that's referring to, in this case, it was me and you as employees.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing I heard from records professionals for years is they got, and particularly now with COVID, the COVID thing going on across North America and all over the world for that matter. People are leaving. The people that were close to retirement, some of them have just decided that that's time to pull the trigger. Like they probably could have retired before, but now they're going, okay, I don't want to, I just want to, retire. And so there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of emails basically in some people's inboxes that have to be dealt with. And there's no process or ability for records and information management to deal with that kind of thing. So Whisper can certainly assist in some of that. And that I've heard that for years from the records management people. Like, what do you do when there's a termination? What do you do when somebody retires? How do you deal with their personal information? How do you find personal information in their email so that you don't just post it up to a website somewhere? Because I've seen that happen too. Along the way. This way you can deal with some process and rules around some of those use cases that we've all been having to live with for all that time. Anyway, thanks, Troy. I really appreciate you having done all this, and I learned an awful lot from this webinar series as well.
Yeah, no, just kind of in that sense is that, yeah, we'll wrap this one up. We'll have all 5 parts put up. I think I got a playlist going on the site and I've been sending them out to everybody, but I'll make sure this one gets posted as well and added to all of that. Just to kind of plug the whole idea of the website here, just so everybody knows, most of this content has been posted to the blog area of our website. And this is where you can find other resources like the help, ways to contact us, ways to request a demo. Now, in the future, we know a lot of people are getting a little bit exhausted with all these webinars. So I know there's a couple of virtual conferences going on in the next couple of weeks. So we do plan to continue to do other sets like this. We do want to change the format a little bit in terms of, okay, everybody doesn't want to come to a webinar all the time. So let's, mix it up a little bit. I think one of the things we'd like to do is focus more in on specific areas. Things like, how do we handle permits? How do we, address forms on a website, something like that. So if you do want to contribute or have any ideas of what you'd like to see in the capabilities of Whisper, definitely let us know. I'll post email sales@westernim.com in chat there. Definitely reach out to us. We do want to have some more webinars. I think we're looking at having some more guest speakers instead of just me and Rick talking. That will be more professionals in the area of that webinar. But we don't have one scheduled yet. We'll definitely make sure everybody gets an email and it'll get posted when we decide to do one. But 5 weeks straight, and with a couple of the other virtual conferences and stuff going on. Nothing scheduled yet, but definitely let us know if you have any
ideas. A break, Troy.
Yeah, take a break. Take a break to get back to work.
Much appreciated. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week, and thanks so much for all of you for attending our webinar series this time. See you for the next one.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.